Heavenly hobos. This was, when I was in seminary, the rector of the seminary started every single year off with a talk entitled that, Heavenly Hobos. And his whole thing was trying to make us focus on how heaven is a future reality that we need to be contemplating every single day. So do we think about heaven daily, or just, once every blue moon when things get really bad? My name is Jacob Hubbard, and this is Freedom, Chapter 6, brought to you from St. Thomas Aquinas in Pilot Point, although, again, we're joining you guys from St. Paul's in Richardson today. So today we're looking at Exodus chapter 6, and we're going to be focusing on just perspective and the importance of contextualization, and something perhaps that the Israelites missed and thus made their suffering more difficult than it had to be. Today we're going to be focusing on God's promise to the Israelites in verses 7 and 8. So let's look at what that says. God says, "I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord." It's really important here that God is setting the Israelites' understanding and expectations on a future reality that has not yet come, right? A future land, a future promise, thus to fill their own reality and hearts with hope. But how do the Israelites respond? Let's look in the next verse. "Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery." So their perspective perhaps worsened their physical slavery because they chose to focus on it to such a degree. And I think that the same thing can happen with us when we encounter real suffering in our lives. If we just continue to focus on it rather than contextualizing it, we actually can make it worse for ourselves than than it already is, right? That's not to say that suffering can be overcome by just sheer mental power. There are some sufferings that are obviously horrible that cannot be so, but that it just really emphasizes the importance of perspective. And I hope that there's a lesson that we can learn today from that. So in order to kind of hit home on that lesson, we're going to bring up one of my favorite books of all time. That's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a personal hero of mine. He's a survivor of the Holocaust, and he was a brilliant psychologist. And he wrote this amazing work. I cannot recommend it enough. Pick it up and read it. It's phenomenal. I mean, it's hard to get through in some parts, but it's a phenomenal read, and it'll be very impactful. I can promise you that. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl is really trying to understand how it is that people were able to survive the Holocaust in concentration camps. And he has this to say. He says that those who survived were those that had something to live for. So whether that be a family member, their home country. For Viktor Frankl himself, it was a piece of paper that he'd shoved into his coat pocket and had somehow managed to keep throughout his entire time. That kind of had all of his life's works and thoughts summarized on it. And he knew that he had a great work that he wanted to make. And that was one of the things that really kept him motivated. And he said that those people who did not live were those who lost hope. And he says that there's this one specific instance that he remembers, where there's this elderly man who received his ration of bread for the day. And he looked at it, and rather than consume it right then and there, he actually gave it to someone else. And it was in that moment that Viktor Frankl had this realization, that everything can be taken from a man except one thing, the last of the human freedoms, and that is to choose one's perspective in any given circumstance, to choose one's own way. And that's, I think, what the Israelites forgot about here, is while they were physically enslaved, they didn't have to be mentally enslaved. They could have been living for another reality. They could have contextualized their own sufferings in the greater narrative of the promise that the Lord was giving to them. There's a great quote that I heard once from Chris Stefanik, and he said that, a lot of us have been through horrible things in our lives. And rather than let that be the whole story, let's let that be a page in the story by contextualizing it. And how can we contextualize it? By focusing on God's promises for us. And knowing that he's going to bring out amazing good from whatever suffering that we're going through. That's the only reason that he even permits suffering, is to bring about a good so amazing that we would gladly suffer what we suffer 1,000 times over, just to experience the grace, the goodness, and the love from that suffering that he promises to bring. So if we set our minds on the promises of God, not only are we kind of lifting our own spirits, but we're actually making the future reality of heaven a reality here and now. And we're living out our identity as heavenly hobos in that way, right? That we are actually living for heaven and bringing it to our own reality here and now by our own mental exercise. So today I invite you just to focus on maybe some sufferings that in your own life and try to see them contextualized in the greater narrative of God's salvific plan for you and for his whole church. Thank you and have a great day.